In the north of London, near Swain's Lane, lies the gothic Highgate Cemetery. While many graveyards have their own ghost stories, those surrounding Highgate Cemetery are among the most bone-chilling tales you will ever hear. I'm Bleaky, and today I'll tell you about the ghost of Highgate Cemetery, from spirits caught on camera by a skeptic to the legend of a vampire that stirred up a crowd of civilians. This popular Victorian burial site is among the most haunted locations in London and hosts several spirits that refuse to rest in peace. In the early years of the 1800s, the population of London had hit an all-time high. This caused a huge problem, as there was also a huge mortality rate, which meant that the city was running out of places to bury their dead. Desperate, some families and hospitals even began conducting illegal burials, with bodies wrapped in cheap materials and buried in mass graves that were just a few feet deep. Some bodies were even buried in alleyways between shops and houses. Now, as these bodies were not buried deep enough, the smell of the burial sites became sickening the further the decomposition got. In short, London stank. Government officials began to realise that this was a public health concern. Something had to be done, and fast. Parliament demanded that several large cemeteries should be built in order to give the dead a place to rest. This resulted in the construction of the Magnificent Seven, with Highgate Cemetery being opened in 1839 on the old grounds of the Ashurst estate. Soon after being opened, Highgate Cemetery became a fashionable place to bury a loved one. You see, the Victorians became increasingly interested in death, especially when it came to the supernatural and the expectations of how a grave should be presented. This led to the stunning Gothic design of the cemetery, including the Circle of Lebanon, which is a circular vault that has enough room for 825 bodies. During the Victorian era, many wanted to be buried the Egyptian way, above ground. This was fueled by the discoveries of Egyptian tombs and artefacts in the 18th century and showed Britain a foreign and romanticised way that people of the past buried their dead. This led to the construction of the Egyptian Avenue, which contains 8 vaults, each of which holds 12 bodies. Because the bodies were not buried, sealed coffins were used for these vaults to prevent decomposition fluids from leaking out and the smell from escaping. Nothing ruins a quaint afternoon stroll like the stench of rotting flesh. While lead-sealed coffins were perfect for vault, there was one little problem. The coffins began to explode. This was because the decomposition gases inside couldn't escape and the pressure became too much. This was solved by drilling a hole in the coffin and placing a pipe inside, which would then be lit from the other side to burn off the gases. While the cemetery managed to keep maintained even after the gardeners were drafted to fight in the First World War, the cemetery sadly fell into disrepair after cheaper graves were bought and those from wealthy families died out or moved away. In 1960, Highgate Cemetery was declared bankrupt and the area became overgrown and abandoned. For a period of time, the location appeared in the Hammer horror movies, which was perfect for its gothic feel. While barely anyone visited anymore, there were those who claimed to see several people wearing black cloaks roaming around the graveyard in the dead of night. Some even claimed that they overheard satanic worship and found proof of rituals on the grounds. Soon after, more and more paranormal accounts began to surface. One night, as a man was driving near the cemetery, his car suddenly broke down. The man checked his fuel level and engine and couldn't come up with an explanation. As he sat back in the driver's seat, however, he was chilled to the bone to see a semi-translucent man staring at him with glowing red eyes from the gate of the cemetery. Before he could react, the apparition vanished. On another occasion, a man was walking along the cemetery wall when he was violently knocked down by something he described as a creature. The thing looked down at him on the ground, but seemingly dissolved when a car drove by and blinded it with its headlights. Another paranormal sighting at Highgate Cemetery is that of a spectral cyclist who has been reported numerous times. He is often seen at the front of the gates and is described as a tall man wearing a top hat. The cycling man is never seen for long, as he speeds past and fades into nothing. Another infamous entity haunting the Highgate Cemetery is known as the Shrouded Figure, who is described as a phantom woman who is only ever seen staring up at the sky and ignoring those who try and talk to her, mistaking the spirit as a living person. When people approach her, she vanishes and reappears further away. still staring up at the sky. A woman in white, as well as the ghost of a nun, have also been spotted roaming the gravestones. James Dobbin inadvertently captured the spirit of the nun while photographing the cemetery. What makes this interesting is that James doesn't actually believe in ghosts, although he did admit that the image did take him aback, especially as he struggled to explain the strange anomaly. Another terrifying sight is that of a shadow figure seen wading into a pond until it's totally submerged. This has caused several people to report the incident to the police, but after they have searched the water, nobody was found. The most famous and bizarre sighting at Highgate Cemetery is that of a vampire, which prompted camera crews and journalists to visit the area after sightings became more frequent. The Highgate vampire is said to be a medieval nobleman who practiced black magic in Romania. After the nobleman's death, the legend says that his followers took his coffin to England aboard a ship and buried it on the Ashurst grounds before the cemetery was even built. After a group of satanic followers began performing rituals, the legend says that the vampire was awoken by those studying the same dark magic. Since then, the tall dark figure has been seen roaming the grounds and makes its presence known by a sudden drop in temperature. After several devoured fox carcasses have appeared in the cemetery, some believe that the vampire's favourite meal is a fresh fox with a side of grave moss salad. Watches and clocks have also been known to stop when the entity is close by. The panic was enough to provoke self-proclaimed vampire hunters to wander the cemetery at night looking for the infamous ghoul. Sadly, this hysteria led to people opening tombs and mutilating corpses with wooden stakes back in the late 60s. Some of these corpses were even removed from their graves and left in odd places in nearby areas, scaring the locals. It's not every day that your dog comes wandering back with a stick connected to a sternum of a Victorian corpse in its mouth. On one occasion, a man even found a decapitated head behind his car windshield, but with it being London, it probably beats finding another parking fine. It was during this time that two magicians began obsessing over the vampire and started a feud that would become known as the Magician's Duel. I mean, you can't deny that's a pretty cool name for an argument. If my Fallout's got a title, it'd probably be something lame like, "Whose turn is it to put the bins out?" On Christmas Eve 1969, one of the magicians, David Farrant, saw a grey figure pass through the cemetery. He was convinced that it was the Highgate vampire after hearing its description. The other magician, Sean Manchester, refuted the claim, as he said that he had already put a stop to the vampire. A rivalry between the two men began to grow until on March 13th, 1970, Sean decided to organise a giant vampire hunt just in case he failed to destroy the vampire. Something tells me that it wasn't just the gravestones that had a lot of weed around them back then. Just saying. Many people answered the call of the vampire hunter, and despite the police trying to control the mob, they jumped over the gates and searched for the undead being. The grave of the vampire was never found, but it didn't stop members of the mob from desecrating the grave of a woman and taking her head before setting all the remains on fire close to the catacombs. A couple of nights later, David, the magician who saw the figure, was caught in the churchyard beside the cemetery, holding a wooden stake and a crucifix. He was arrested and taken to court. I bet Van Helsing never got that crap. Luckily for the magician, the case was dropped. The tension between the two men grew, and they planned on meeting on Friday the 13th, 1973 to have their magician's duel, but it never happened. Later, however, David was jailed for interfering with human remains in the cemetery, claims that he insisted with the actions of Satanists. The feud between the two magicians continued right up until 2019 when David passed away. Today, very few sightings of the vampire are reported. One spirit that is reported regularly is that of a mad old woman. This entity is described as having long grey hair that blows behind her even when there isn't any wind. Disturbingly, those that have seen her say that she rushes between distant graves when children are in the cemetery. Some believe that she does this because she killed a child many years ago in a fit of rage, and that her spirit lingers as a result of her sins. So, were the spirit of Highgate disturbed by the neglect of the grounds and satanic worship? Or are the ghost stories nothing more than superstition inspired by an obviously creepy location and people easily influenced when travelling near the cemetery at night? Let me know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video and would like to watch more supernatural and paranormal content, please make sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. And until next time, sleep well, friends.